Hello everyone, got 10 little Johnny jokes for you today. So little Johnny and his father were at a horse auction, and Johnny watched as his father examined each horse carefully. He ran his hands up and down the horse's legs, rump, and chest, checking for any signs of illness or injury. After a few minutes, Johnny asked his father, "Why are you doing that?" His father explained, "I have to make sure that the horses I'm considering buying are healthy and in good condition. It's important to do this before I make a purchase." But Johnny looked worried and said, "Dad, I think the ups guy wants to buy Mom." So while supervising the students on the playground, Miss Smith noticed one of them making faces at the others. She stopped to gently reprimand the child, saying, "Johnny, when I was a little girl, I was told that if I made ugly faces, it would freeze and I would stay like that." Little Johnny looked up at the teacher and replied, "Well, Miss Smith, you can't say you weren't warned." So one day, little Johnny was busy digging a hole in his backyard. His next-door neighbor noticed him and decided to investigate. "Hello, Johnny, what are you up to?" the neighbor asked. "My goldfish died and I'm going to bury him," Johnny replied. The neighbor raised an eyebrow and said, "That's a really big hole for a goldfish, isn't it?" Johnny smirked and said, "That's because he's inside your cat." So while playing in the backyard, little Johnny accidentally killed a honeybee. His father saw what he had done and became angry, saying, "No honey for you for 1 month." Later in the day, Johnny's father caught him tearing the wings off a butterfly. "That's it. No butter for you for 1 month," his father exclaimed. As the family was preparing dinner that evening, a cockroach scurried across the kitchen floor and Johnny's mother quickly stomped on it. She looked up to see little Johnny and his father watching her, and Johnny asked his father, "Are you going to tell her, Dad, or do you want me to?" So the teacher told her class, "I'm going to hold something under my desk and I want you to try to guess what it is. This first one is round and red." Little Johnny raised his hand, but the teacher ignored him and a girl said, "It's a plum, miss." The teacher replied, "No, it's an apple, but I like your thinking." The next one is oval-shaped and green. Again, the teacher ignored little Johnny and a boy guessed, "It's a kiwi, miss." The teacher said, "No, it's a guava, but I like your thinking." Finally, little Johnny spoke up and said, "I have one, miss. It's stiff, about an inch long, and has a red nib." The teacher exclaimed, "Johnny, that's disgusting." But Johnny quickly replied, "No, it's a match, but I like your thinking." So little Johnny comes home from Sunday school with a black eye. His father sees it and says, "Johnny, how many times do I have to tell you not to fight with the other boys?" "But Dad, it wasn't my fault. We were all in church saying our prayers. We all stood up and my teacher in front of me had her dress in the crack of her butt. I reached over and pulled it out. That's when she hit me." "Johnny," the father said, "you don't do those kind of things to women." Sure enough, the very next Sunday Johnny came home with the other eye black and blue. Johnny's father said, "Johnny, I thought we had a talk." "But Dad," Johnny said, "it wasn't my fault. There we were in church saying our prayers. We all stood up and my teacher in front of us had her dress in the crack of her butt. Then Louis, who was sitting next to me, saw it and he reached over and pulled it out. Now I know she doesn't like this, so I pushed it back in." So the boss called little Johnny into his office and shouted, "Come here right now." Little Johnny responded, "Yes, sir." The boss said, "I saw you arguing with the customer who just left. I've told you before that the customer is always right. Do you understand me?" Little Johnny replied, "Yes, sir. The customer is always right." The boss asked, "So what were you arguing about with that customer?" Little Johnny said, "He told me that my boss is a stupid idiot, sir." The boss exclaimed, "That jerk. What did you say to him?" Little Johnny replied, "I told him he's right." So the neighborhood boys often teased Little Johnny for being dumb. Their favorite joke was to offer him a choice between a nickel and a dime, and Johnny always chose the nickel. One day, a neighbor noticed this and said to Johnny, "Those boys are making fun of you. Don't you know that a dime is worth more than a nickel, even though the nickel is bigger?" But Johnny just grinned and replied, "Well, if I took the dime, they'd stop doing it, and so far I've made $20. So one day, Little Johnny's teacher asked the class to go home and come up with a story that ended with a moral. The next day, the teacher asked for volunteers to share their stories. First, little Susie raised her hand and told a story about her family's farm. They would take the chicken eggs to town to sell at the market, but one day they hit a bump and all the eggs fell out of the basket onto the road. The moral of the story, Susie said, was don't keep all your eggs in one basket. Next, little Lucy shared a story about her family's farm, where they put chicken eggs in an incubator. One weekend, only 8 out of 12 eggs hatched, and the moral of the story was don't count your chickens before they hatch. Then it was Little Johnny's turn. He told a story about his Uncle Ted, who fought in the Vietnam War and was shot down over enemy territory. He only had time to grab a case of beer, a machine gun, and a machete before jumping out of the plane. Johnny said his uncle drank the case of beer, then landed in the middle of 100 Vietnamese soldiers and killed 70 with his machine gun, 20 more with his machete, and the last 10 with his bare hands. The teacher looked shocked and asked what the moral of the story could possibly be. Johnny replied, "Don't mess with Uncle Ted when he's been drinking." So a new teacher, who had recently graduated with a degree in psychology, was excited to put her knowledge into practice in the classroom. She began her first lesson by saying, "Everyone who thinks they're stupid, stand up." As she scanned the room, she noticed that after a few seconds, Little Johnny stood up. Surprised, the teacher asked him, "Do you think you're stupid, Little Johnny?" But Johnny quickly replied, "No, ma'am, but I hate to see you standing there all by yourself."